Picture a single bed. 2 people in it, him and her. Not married. Not even truly engaged. The candle has almost burned down, it's 10 below zero outside, and under that quilt lie a young man and a young woman who won't be wed for another 6 months. And here's what should be impossible: by morning, nothing improper has happened between them. Both families know they shared a bed. And both are content. Both slept soundly on the other side of the wall. Now think about you. 6 months of dating apps. Hundreds of swipes. 3 dozen awkward coffee dates. Hours of texting that dies out over nothing. And after all of it, you still don't really know who's sitting across from you, whether he has a temper, whether she's kind, what happens when the first real hardship comes. Yet those 2, under one quilt on a cold Pennsylvania farm, learned more about each other in a single night than you learn in a year. They knew something you don't. And the modern world buried that something so deep, people stopped saying it out loud. My name is Amos. I grew up among people who still hitch a horse to a buggy and light a kerosene lamp at dusk. What I'm about to tell you, I first heard from my grandfather, on a winter evening, when he was nearly 80 and I was 12. He called it by one old word: bundling. In our tongue, courtship in bed. I'll give you 3 reasons why the young were laid in one bed, and almost none of them cost a penny. Then I'll show you how our whole world got this custom exactly backwards. And at the very end, I'll tell you what's left of it today, in homes the electric lines never reached. Stay with me. This is the thing people stopped telling. Pennsylvania, more than 200 years ago. January, and the light is starting to fade. Across the frozen fields rides a young man, 8, 10, sometimes 15 miles in an open wagon, in wind that cuts your face like a knife. He's riding to a girl he set his eye on at a prayer meeting. And here's the first question the old world answered nothing like you'd expect: where do you put him when he arrives? He won't ride back on a night like this. 15 miles over ice at 5 below isn't a journey, it's a certain death for horse and rider. So he stays the night. Look around the house. There's one truly warm room, the kitchen, where the hearth burns. One bedroom, maybe 2. Beds you can count on one hand, and each already has someone in it, the little ones head to toe, the old folks against the wall. In winter, firewood is counted log by log, and a beeswax candle costs so much they burn it only in real need. The plain, cold arithmetic of a farmer's night: the guest has to be kept warm, and there's no spare warm bed, nor any way to make one. My grandfather put it like this: warmth was worth more than pride. In a house where the water in the bucket wore a crust of ice by morning and frost climbed the nails by the door, lying under a single wool blanket wasn't a sin, it was common sense. 2 people warm each other all night. One left alone in a cold room stiffens by dawn and rides home with a cough that carries him to the grave by spring. And heating a whole bedroom for some visiting boy meant an extra bundle of firewood every night, all winter, which no one could afford. So the young were laid where it was already warm. Fully clothed, wrapped in wool head to toe, in stockings and a bonnet. Not looseness, thrift. The very thrift they sell you today as a $5,000 a month heating bill. But warmth alone settled nothing. Simply laying a boy and a girl side by side and blowing out the candle, no plain household would have stood for that, no community where the fear of God stood above any comfort. And here comes the thing people still snicker at, though it was cleverer than it looks at first glance. They called it the bundling board, the courting plank. A board 6 or 8 inches high, smoothly planed, set into the bed down the middle, lengthwise, from headboard to footboard, and fixed in grooves so it couldn't shift in the night. A wall between the 2 halves of the bed. Him on his side, her on hers, the board between them all night until the rooster crowed. In some places, instead of a board, the girl was sewn up to the armpits into a long canvas sack, a bundling bag, and drawn tight with a cord and a knot. By her mother's own hands, in that same house, behind that same thin wall. Does that sound like debauchery? Just the opposite, the most deliberate safeguard a poor family could afford for almost nothing, one board and a spool of thread against all of human weakness. Think about what that board actually did. It didn't block the main thing, the very thing the whole business was for. It let two people lie side by side, warm, face to face, and talk. All night. In whispers, so as not to wake the house. About what he wanted from life and his land. Whether she feared a winter alone on a far-off farm, 3 miles of snow to the nearest neighbor. About the children they both wanted. About faith. About whether he had a temper behind the plow, whether she was patient at the stove. By day, no such talk was possible, work, the fields, the livestock, 10 people around and never a minute alone. But at night, by a guttering candle, through a pine plank, 2 people finally heard each other's real voice. Not the polished one, not the one for strangers, not the one you put on in public. The real one. Here's the game you can take for yourself today, and you won't need a board for it. Before you tie your life to someone, get one conversation like that, long, late, unhurried, no phone in your hand, where you talk not about where to eat but about what you fear and what you truly want. One night like that will tell you more than 6 months of pretty dates with all the right answers. The old folks simply built that conversation right into the bed, where the cold kept you close anyway, and the board kept you from dodging the main thing. Now stop for a second and answer me, right there in the comments, in one word. Would you do it? One night, an honest conversation until dawn, a board between you, and no pretending. Or is it easier for you behind a phone screen, where you can always leave without telling the truth and delete the chat by morning? Right, board, or screen? I genuinely want to know whose side you're on. Because the question cuts to the bone. In 200 years we've invented 1,000 ways to meet, and forgotten how to truly know a person. The young on that cold farm were solving exactly that problem. And they solved it better than we do. There's a third reason, and it's about time. That young man who rode 15 miles through the frost couldn't drop by every evening. The plowing, the haymaking, the livestock, the short winter day that dies by 4. Courtship stretched out not because there was nowhere to hurry to, but because the road was long and the evenings were few. 15 miles there, 15 back, nearly the whole short January day in the saddle, in the wind, for nothing. Ride out, sit an hour by the hearth in front of the whole family, and ride back into the night. No sensible man did that, no father sent such a guest away. He stayed. And the long night under the quilt, across the board, wasn't a lover's whim, it was the only way to fit a real courtship into a life where the journey alone took more out of you than the wooing itself. The old folks weren't drawing love out. They were saving the road and the short daylight. There you have 3 reasons, and all 3 are plain, earthly, cheap. Warmth there wasn't enough of to go around. A board that cost a single sliver of wood. A long road too dear to waste. No storybook romance, no debauchery that some are quick to paint onto this custom after the fact. The bare reckoning of a poor, cold house. You'd think that was the whole secret, write it down and pass it on. But no. Before I get to the strangest part, answer one question for yourself, because everyone who hears about bundling for the first time trips over it. If it was so innocent, then why all the whispering, why the laughter? Why is someone still certain it was a sly little loophole for sin? Here's why. People look out from their own warm house with its locked door and measure another age by their own yardstick. It seems to them, 2 in one bed means something bad happened, it can't be otherwise. They see a bed and imagine a scandal. But where they see scandal, there was the dullest, most calculating, most family-minded custom in the world, with a mother behind the wall and a knot to be checked in the morning. The world mistook poverty for depravity. And to understand why it was wrong, you have to ask the last question, the one everything hangs on. Everything I've described isn't enough to explain why families put up with this year after year. Warmth, the board, the road let the young lie side by side. But what stopped them from pushing the board aside once the candle went out and the house fell asleep? A plank of pine. You slide that away in 1 second with one finger. So it wasn't the board that guarded them. And here's where the thing our world got backwards lies buried. Listen closely, because this is the whole trick of it. You think that bed was the most private, most secret place in the house. Just the opposite, the most exposed. Behind a thin plank wall slept the parents, and not slept, but listened to every rustle. In the dark, the little ones darted across the floor. A house of bare boards, where every creak of a floorboard, every whisper, every sigh, every turn onto one side could be heard. The girl sewn into a sack by her mother's hands, the mother who'd check those knots in the morning, and God help them if they turned out untied. The young lay not in privacy. They lay in full view, in the middle of a wakeful house, where every last soul knew about them and everyone was listening. Here's where the modern world got it backwards, down to the last letter. We've hammered it into our heads that privacy protects honor. That the young should be locked away from prying eyes, given an app, a dark hall, a car, a rented flat for the evening, anything so no one sees and no one interferes. But the old folks knew the opposite. Honor is guarded not by walls but by witnesses. Not by a lock on the door but by a wakeful house. Not by darkness but by a dozen open ears. They didn't hide the courtship, they set it out in the very middle, within earshot of all the kin and half the village. Everyone knew who rode to whom on Saturdays. Everyone saw that board. And precisely because everyone was watching, nothing bad ever happened. Now the 3 reasons fold into one. Warmth brought them under one quilt. The road gave them a long night. The board gave them a conversation. But what held it all together wasn't wood and it wasn't thread, it was 100 unseen eyes of a sleeping house. Courtship in bed was not a loophole around the elders, as outsiders imagine. The elders invented it themselves, a way to give the young closeness, warmth, and honest talk until dawn, while never letting them out of sight for a single minute. Not freedom instead of oversight. Freedom inside oversight. That's the system they built out of cold, a board, and thin walls, and it worked where any dating app falls apart today. That's why the custom died, quietly, on its own, without a single ban. By the middle of the 19th century, houses grew warmer, cast iron stoves, spare rooms, cheap candles, and soon a kerosene lamp in every bedroom. The need to warm each other under one quilt vanished. Doors appeared that latched shut, and walls you could no longer hear through. And the moment the young had real privacy, the old board became useless, and everything else quietly went with it, the oversight, the conversation, the wakeful house. Preachers who had once tolerated bundling now thundered against it from the pulpit as a temptation. We decided we'd handed the young their freedom. But in truth we took from them the very listening house that guarded them better than any lock. No one abolished it by decree. People simply stopped tending the common hearth, and the custom froze on its own. And yet it didn't die completely. In the oldest, most conservative communities, among some of the old order Amish, in the remote corners the electric lines never reached, its shadow lives on to this day. Not the same bed, not the same board, of course. What remains is the heart of it, courtship that unfolds not in the dark of a rented flat but under a parent's roof, in a house where everyone knows and everyone sees. The young sit down to talk in a room where the family is near. A boy rides out to court in a buggy, and the whole community knows to whose door. The witnesses never left, they just set the board aside as unneeded, because it was never the point. Where we kept only our privacy, they kept the most valuable thing, the listening house. And their marriages, I'll tell you straight, hold together stronger than ours. Remember it this way, so you can retell it in your own words at your own table tomorrow. The bed where 2 unmarried people lay was not the most secret place in the house but the most open. It wasn't the board that guarded them, it was the witnesses. And our world threw out the witnesses and kept only the board, the one that gets pushed aside in the very first second. We took for scandal what was in fact the most chaste, most deliberate, most practical courtship the cold land ever knew. Our dates are riskier than that bed with a board down the middle. Far riskier. One thing to do today, a simple one. The next time you want to truly know a person, don't reach for privacy first, reach for a long, honest conversation. One evening, no phone, where you talk not about nothing but about what you fear and what you want out of a whole life. You won't need a board. All you need is the very conversation it was once set in the bed to make possible. And now answer me in the comments, quickly, off the top of your head, don't overthink it. Would you lie down on that bed with a board down the middle, knowing the whole house is listening through the wall? Board, or screen, one word. And stick around, because next time I'll break down another thing we don't like to talk about, why at our weddings the bride isn't in white, why we marry on Thursdays, and never in a church, which we simply don't have. There's a reason of its own, and it'll surprise you more than this one. I'm Amos. And now you know it too.